Hi, welcome to Module 2 of the Pet Advocate Mental Health and Seni's Law Empowerment Model. In Module 1, we began to look at different aspects of the legislation, the introduction to the aims, the human rights responsibility, and some of the definitions that emerge throughout the legislation. Today we're going to focus a bit more on what is a responsible person, the policies on the Mental Health Use of Forces Act, also upon knowing your rights, and also advanced choice documents. The main focus will be on section 2, 3 and 4, and a lot of the work you can be doing at home or interactive online. In this section you can decide, how am I going to understand this? You can work in threes. One person can look at the responsible person, which is on page 16 to 19, take some brief notes, draw some diagrams. Similarly on the key points on section 3, which is the policy about the Use of Forces Act, which will be on pages 18 to 24. You can do in a matrix, whatever actually is really useful for your learning process. And one person can look at the key points in section 4, which is the information about the Use of Forces Act in a bit more detail. So let's look at some of the ways we can actually do that. So really the responsible person is the person responsible for the legislation. It's a named officer within the mental health unit. They have a legal responsibility to reduce harm. They're appointed by the mental health unit. They should have a really good understanding of patients, children, learning disabilities as well. And also an action plan should be developed by the mental health responsibility person. And also they should be working to challenge practice across the mental health unit with all practitioners. And we're going to see that in a bit more detail. They can also delegate their work to someone called a responsible adult delegate, who will be the manager. We offer and advise everybody as an organisation in the community, and particularly CAPSA is developing this, is to develop an impact analysis. Does this really work? Who is this person? Are they culturally informed? Are they doing things that are really relevant to community empowerment? Are they actually addressing the definition from a cultural perspective? And how does that influence or is informed by the work and the workers in terms of their job description? We advise people to read carefully and just take notes. Use diagrams like these. This is just a diagram that tells you that the Mental Health Use of Forces Act should be protecting people's human rights. It should recognize when people are suffering from trauma before they go in and the trauma of being restrained. What are the things we need to do to prevent these things happening that may be available through legislation like the Equalities Act and staff safety and training? We're also looking at the importance of risk assessments, working with children and having a child-centered and culturally informed and culture-centric environment. We also want to know, and it's really important, that training as devised by the RRN is actually being activated before anybody carries out a restraint. Again, the constant theme for this workshop and any other workshop is devised and lived experience impact analysis. For CAPSA, Culture Appropriate Peer Support and Peer Advocacy, will we get the right type of rights and support? Is the practice going to be culturally sensitive? Does it really address some of the things around the Mental Health Act around significant harm? And also, are the training standard, lived experience and culturally relevant? Really crucial issue. So that we've been again to ask the people, make sure if you're a community and you live in the community and you've got family and friends, that you're given information on what the mental health unit is providing, your rights to a care plan, that you should know about the impact of certain guidelines. That stuff should be recorded and policies should be co-produced. That means you should be told, you should be informed, you should contribute towards a co-production model. Things are published for you as the family, and also you should know about the skill set offered by the staff. But also, staff are vulnerable to being abused and suffering trauma, particularly for the huge number of black people who are working in mental health units. You should have details of all health and relevant policies and procedures. And again, please do your impact analysis. Look at the guidance. Is it culturally relevant? Is the website easily readable and accessible? What does the dashboard say? Who's producing it? Who's it for? Is it culturally relevant? And more importantly, is the model co-production or is it a collaborative informed model? Because the Mental Health Use of Forces Act says that co-production is about giving parity to people with lived experience. That means what you say is just as important as a clinical perspective. So moving on in terms of section 3, things to consider before the legislation is that to be proactive, consider other legislations that can stop people being abused. The Social Care Act, the type of social provisions that people will need to stop them from going to the hospital and stop them from being restrained. How you consult with the patients. How the staff really deal with overrepresented group, which is the central challenge for black communities, which is what Seni's law experience, and this is why this is crucial to the master icon, Ajibola Lewis. That we should co-design these policies and procedures and publicize them in the right and correct language, and also data that's accessible to people with lived experience so they can actually interpret it and make decisions about is there really an improvement taking place. And again, for all these different sections, please begin to address a lived experience impact analysis. CAPSA is developing one about good practice. There'll be some things around co-production, and there'll be also some around the communication systems. For those of you who begin to read section 4 of the legislation on the Use of Forces Act, you begin to look at the information on your rights. It's very, very detailed at the back. A lot of these rights you can find in the Patient and Race Equality Framework. In terms of co-production, please read some handouts and books by papers recently written by Dr. King around co-production action from a lived experience. Also, with CAPSA, which is really most importantly an advocate representation of cultural rights, that planning should consider important aspects of the Mental Health Act and its reform, the Mental Capacity Act and the Equality Act, and I would also say the Human Rights Act as well. But also then there may be issues there will be breaches taking place that you need to learn to challenge. The training on this and will be future training is CAPS is going to be developing a legal framework. Gabriel's now working on that, and the framework that will be developed in our report to the Department of Health and Social Care. We will be developing a co-production framework, a legal framework of true parity. And then we'll be looking at some competency issues about what makes a mental health unit competent. In the next section, we want to get people to really experience about what is the issues and challenges for good practices when people are restrained. And the restraint does not take place at the point in which someone's body is being restrained. There are things that happen in terms of good practices that we should stop that happening. Many of those happen in terms of what we call the 136 on the Mental Health Act. We'll offer some information now on the patient's right guide that Gabriel has produced. But 136 is that the police will pick someone up if they think they're suffering from a mental disorder. The case study, we want you to read it, we want you to listen to it. And remember some of the things you learned in Module 1 about the experience of Seni's law, and also how this becomes repeated in this case study, because it leads to some of the good practice challenges about what is culturally appropriate care and treatment. And so that you'd be now beginning to select 1 or 2 people to do the role play, or to maybe visualize the role play, or thinking about now, what are the really important legal issues and practice issues, particularly around the appropriateness use of the approved mental health practitioner in terms of the assessment? Was the consultant psychiatrist culturally approved in their role? Did they make the right decisions? And this is really important for Seni's law, in terms of the experiences of Seni when he was in hospital, placed on a Section 2. Can you challenge that? In the role play, it should take place in the 13636 suite. You'll be put in different positions. One of you may want to be the consultant, might want to be a doctor. You'll be just looking at a behavior, asking questions. In the next module, you'll see the role play and you'll see the response that took place. But we're going to give you some experiences of the forms that you'll be using as well, in terms of the section forms and the place of safety forms. And some of these are actually in the first report sent out to Department of Health and Social Care. So please connect these types of learning. At the end of the role play, please de-roll. Please talk about how you feel. But also really develop a first person of authentic approach. How does the person feel? What is shaping our decisions when we restrain people or we section them? The last sections of these things is begin to look at things that are preventative. We are now asking people to think about an advanced choice document, but we're thinking of it from a cultural appropriate perspective. Things that you think are good practice that should happen if you were to be assessed under the Mental Health Act. And also we're thinking about it in terms of the things that you would like to happen that prevent you from being restrained in a hospital setting. Again, let's go back to the impact analysis, which is the next section of this training, because we are actually now testing some of the principles of the Mental Health Act and how they apply to black people in the mental health unit. And we're asking people, the principles are least restrictive. Is this the least thing they could have done, right? Did you have any choice? Was it person-centered or were you treated like an animal? And also, these are preventative things. Was anything considered in terms of therapeutic benefit before they even considered the restraints? And then we've got you some things to consider, yes or no. The value of human rights. Yeah. Do you know about the Montgomery Rule, which is a legal power given to consultants that they must have empathy for the experience of the people that they're actually working with? Did the person who worked with the person being restrained show we respect? Did they understand the person's wishes? And let's go back to what we just discussed in the last slide. This whole thing around an advanced choice. Was there respect for diversity? Was it trauma informed? Did they avoid unlawful discrimination? Unfortunately, on ward, we know there are processes of racialized discrimination that are taking place and operating in relation to African communities. Could they have avoided it? What's the risk of doing this? I've read many documents that people knew that the risk of being restrained would have led to adverse responses later on in their life. What's the impact? This is really important when we went back in Module 1. Slavery was the first moment of being restrained. These are historical moments of reliving trauma that needs to be challenged. And also, how ethical was the process? And what I mean by that, did they follow the rules and procedures? Here, we've just looked at an advanced choice document, which is something that's been developed for medical care that was called the advanced statement. Many people think this will reduce restraints and reduce people with section under the Mental Health Act. CAPS is now developing a model which is more about information and rights and trying to shape a form that's co-produced with people with lived experiences. So in this slide here, we begin to look at review. What did you learn? What can you remember? Because this is the review of trauma. Did you remember the sections that we talked about in terms of the Act? Can you remember how many hours a 136 lasts for? How many days does a Section 2 last for? How many months does a Section 3 last for? Can you name 3 people involved in the mental health assessment? So we're now testing your knowledge, because knowledge is the ability to give power to people to challenge the legal framework. Lastly, we've now completed Module 2. Module 3 will look more specifically at some of the roles and the policies of a lived experience model. Thank you very much.